welcome, everybody. Happy to have you guys all here tonight. Join us for the state of college admissions and the financial aid. So I'm going to give it about 30 seconds. Appreciate your punctuality. I'll give it about 30 seconds to let everyone kind of get settled in, and then we will kind of dive in and get the show on the road here. All right, so that's about 30 seconds. Okay. All right, great. So welcome everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight. We do appreciate it. So quick, we're going to go through some brief bios. We'll do some housekeeping stuff, and then, like I said, we'll really dive into the content. Some of you guys tonight, may have been on some other College Aid Pro webinars with myself, possibly Matt Carpenter, Peg Keogh. And honestly, with all due respect to those webinars, including the ones that I've done, I don't think tonight's presentation is really going to be the best, most robust webinar that you're going to see. I guess you could be the judge of that in an hour or so. But tonight we're going to give you a really high-level overview of how the financial aid and scholarship process works. We're not going to deep dive that, but we are going to tackle, what money's available, how am I going to get aid, at what schools, if I'm not eligible for aid, then what, right? And then really, we're going to deep dive into the admissions component, different admissions trends, test optional, early decision, early action, etc. Right? So like I said, I am really excited about tonight. And, again, hopefully in an hour or so, which we should be right around, everyone's saying the same. Real quick background on me. Firstly, my name is Matt Mulhern. I'm based in Jersey City, New Jersey, which, we're right across the river from Manhattan. I'm a college financial aid and scholarship expert. I've been doing this and helping families navigate the college process for over a decade now with College Aid Pro. So basically I work with families in a one-on-one capacity to, in short form, help ensure they maximize the amount of aid and scholarships they receive as they navigate the process, right? So I am on the, financial side of the college process. In my role here at College Aid Pro, as you guys could probably imagine, I obviously meet a lot of people, have a lot of different conversations with college admissions officers, college financial aid officers, high school counselors. And really one of the reasons I'm so excited about tonight is I'm joined tonight by Brian Ford. And Brian, for my money, is the most knowledgeable, well-rounded college expert I've come across. No exaggeration, completely true, in all my years, right? And certainly not to speak for Brian, and I'll let him introduce himself in a second here. But he's had various different roles, working as admissions counselor at some prestigious colleges and universities. He's worked on the private side. He's worked at some very prestigious high schools. And he's really seen it from every perspective, right? And so he has some unbelievable insight and knowledge into the whole college process. Maybe kind of the thing I value most from Brian in working to get together with him over the last few years is he's read, and this is a staggering number to me, over 60,000 admissions applications, right? So he's been in the room with the admissions committee and has, like I said, great insight and great understanding of who gets in, why they get in, and who doesn't, right? So in working together with them over the last few years, I personally gained, a tremendous amount of insight, tremendous amount of knowledge about the admissions process. And again, being on the webinar here tonight with him is one of the reasons I am so excited. So hopefully that tees you up pretty good. And without further ado, I'll kick it over to him, let him introduce himself, and then we'll dive in here.
Thank you, Matt. And I appreciate the kind words very much. I think it's a good time to kind of do this webinar and dive in. It's June, school just ended. We're all in a good mood. So that was much appreciated. Again, my name is Brian Ford. I'm located about 20 minutes north of Boston. Grew up in and around the city, and then went to college kind of in and around the city. Started in college admissions pretty much right out of school, and worked for about 10 years on the college admissions side, probably most notably for everyone around the country at Boston University, where I spent close to 4 years as the assistant director of admissions there. It was there that I oversaw our territories from Texas and Oklahoma specifically, but throughout my time in college admissions, I read applications from well over 20 states, thousands and thousands of high schools. I spent a lot of time on the road meeting every different type of student throughout the country, and even some internationally as well too. And then, as Matt said, just got to read such a varied and diverse group of applications from the three schools that I worked at. And so saw really what the process was like, why certain students get in and why don't, what makes a strong essay, what makes a strong interview, really all of the pieces of the application that families are yearning for. My favorite part of the job when I was in the college side was advocating for students. And I realized there was a place that could do that full time. And so after I received my master's from BU, I switched over to the high school side. And I've spent the past 8 or 9 years working at two different prestigious high schools. First one in Reading, Massachusetts, where I served as the director of college counseling. And then I've spent the last 3+ years now at Archbishop Williams High School, which is located in Braintree, Mass, as their Dean of College Advisement and Student Advancement. So I oversee the entire college admissions process, as well as any larger academic initiatives for the school. And then, have spent kind of since I would say about the start of the pandemic, the past 3+ years, officially as kind of an independent private counselor. But my relationship specifically with College A Pro goes well back to kind of the beginning of when I switched over to the high school side. Myself and Matt Carpenter, one of our fearless leaders, met and kind of realized we, had a lot of the same jive of wanting to help families get through what was just a really unique process. We had similar experiences, both coming from, blue collar families, and admitted that we didn't know a lot coming out of the process. And so we are now in this role where we can help families get through it. And so tonight, I'll tell you a little bit about what's happening in the crazy world of college admissions. We'll scratch some surfaces, but obviously there will always be more to talk about. But I'm really excited to kind of share with you some of the current happenings in college admissions right now.
All right, awesome. Yeah, appreciate that, Brian. So real quick, housekeeping. Yes, this is being recorded, right? We're recording it. As long as you registered, you will receive the recording tomorrow along with the slide deck. So fear not if you missed something or want to circle back to it. Also, make this as interactive as you want, right? Please use the Q&A. I already had someone asked if I was related to another Mulhern. I am not. I do have a brother, Tom Mulhern, but no Tim. So yeah, be as interactive as you want. Fire away. We're probably not going to get to every single question, right? But we're going to do our best. So yeah, pepper us with as much as you got. So quick rundown, here's what we're going to do, right? So I'm going to do a real quick introduction of how the whole financial aid process works, right? From a real kind of high level, what I call the Cliff Note version. We're not going to deep dive that. We're just going to get you, hopefully it's a refresher. You've been on here before, a quick refresher of how the college financial aid process works and how you can start trying to figure that piece of things out. And then I'm briefly going to touch on, you've probably heard about this, the significant FAFSA changes that are coming, starting with the class of 2024. And then I'll throw it over to Brian and let him take the reins on the Admissions Act. All right, so let's get going. All right, so college financial aid, right? So what is financial aid, right? Financial aid is simply a discount on the sticker price, right? A discount on the sticker price. So you're not paying what, that sticker price looks like. So when it comes to financial aid, there's actually 3 different types. There's need-based financial aid, there's merit-based scholarships, and then there's self-help, right? So the self-help aid in the third box here, self-help aid is what I call the least helpful, right? It's what we're going to touch on least. Let me tell you this, so self-help aid is loans, work study. If you're a class of 2024, this is what you should be least concerned about, right? Trust me when I tell you, the loans will be there. Right now, there's better versions of different loans, but that's not the focus right now. What you want to be focused on as class of 2024, as you approach the summer leading into senior year, is actually reducing your cost, right? You want to reduce that sticker price as much as you can. And you really do that through 2 vehicles, either need-based financial aid or merit-based scholarships, right? So these 2 things are opposite. We'll start with merit-based scholarships, kind of intuitive. Everyone kind of gets, everyone kind of understands, right? Merit-based scholarships are all about the student, their academics, athletics, artists, etc., right? It's all about the student's profile, their talents. So your son, daughter, child applies to a school. The school says, we really like this kid, right? For whatever the reason, we're going to offer them a financial incentive to come to our school, right? A merit-based scholarship, kind of intuitive. We all kind of get and understand. One point that I always like to highlight when we talk merit-based scholarships is that not every school offers merit scholarships, right? The Ivies, for example, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, UPenn, they do not give merit scholarships. They don't exist, right? The NESCAC schools, Amherst, Bates, Middlebury, Bowdoin, they don't give merit scholarships. They don't exist. at those schools, right? What those type of schools do, and a number of others, is give what they call need-based grants, right? So merit-based scholarships and need-based grants are kind of opposite. We said merit-based scholarships are all about the student. Need-based grants or need-based financial aid is all about the family, right? And the family's profile, income, assets, number of people in the household, et cetera, right? So again, we kind of intuitively get merit-based scholarships. We apply to a school. The school actually gives merit aid. They like my kid, they give them a merit scholarship. Well, how about need-based aid, right? How do I know, if my son or daughter, how do I know if my family is going to qualify for need-based financial aid? And if I am, how much am I going to get, right? So this is the formula that every school in the country uses to determine your family's eligibility, keyword eligibility, for need-based financial aid, right? So they all use the same formula. They go COA minus EFC equals need. So the COA is that big, scary sticker price, room, board, tuition, fees, cost of attendance, 50, 70, some schools upwards of $90,000, right? Your all-in cost. Then they subtract what's called the EFC. EFC stands for expected family contribution. It's a very important number. It's an actual dollar amount that is assigned to your family. And it's basically the minimum amount that a school says that we think this family can pay. Now, first change that's going to happen with the FAFSA that I want to point out, this EFC is going to be changed to what's called the SAI, the Student Aid Index. For most of you, if not, all of you, it's a distinction without a difference, right? So SAI, EFC, it's essentially the same thing. They're just changing the language, okay? So they take the cost of attendance, they subtract your family's EFC, and that equals your family's eligibility for need-based financial aid at a particular school. Now, important concept to understand, just because you're eligible for need-based financial aid at a specific school does not mean you are going to get that, right? The EFC doesn't mean that's what you're going to pay. You have to understand that every college is its own business, right? And they all do business differently. Some schools are exceedingly generous and meet need-based financial aid at 100%, meaning every dollar that you're eligible for need-based aid, they will give you, right? Other schools meet it at 0%, and they'll say, go take a loan, right? They won't give you anything, okay? So every college is their own business, but this is kind of a starting point to start to understand, what type of discount can I be eligible for here, right? Now, I've been doing this, for over a decade. And when I get to this slide, inevitably, going back 10 years, a couple questions, inevitably pop up, right? So the first one is, how do I know my EFC, right? How do I figure out my EFC? The second one is, how am I supposed to know how different colleges do business? How do I know if they meet 100% of need-based aid? How do I know if they do or don't give merit scholarships, right? And to answer those two questions, that was kind of the impetus of why we created our MyCap software, right? So if you haven't yet, you should have received a link to create a free account on your MyCap software. We really strongly encourage every single one of you to do so. And what you can start to do, and let me pull up kind of my Matt Jr. hypothetical screen here. What you can start to do with your MyCap software, maybe. Let's see. What you want to be able to start to do is, understand what's your EFC, right? Doesn't want to share. All right, I'm going to come back. I'm going to show that to you. So you want to set up an account on the MyCap software. You start to understand your EFC. You start to understand how different colleges do business differently. And you want to start to get an understanding of the colleges that you're interested in thus far. How are they going to treat you, right? How are they going to do business? How are they going to treat your family? You would think after all these years of doing the Zoom since COVID, I'd be a master at it. Clearly, I'm not. So my fault on that. So we'll get to the MyCap software. Again, it's a very powerful tool to start to understand for your specific family. This process is a very school-specific process, right? And then a very family-specific process. So you want to start to get a handle on, where your family fits in the need-based financial aid profile. And then the schools that you're interested in, how are they potentially going to do business for you guys, right? Okay, last one I'm going to hit on, and then I'm going to throw the reins over to Brian and find the MyCap software. So as you've heard, there are significant FAFSA changes coming, right? There are significant FAFSA changes coming. I'm not going to go through each one of these individually, but I do want you to be aware that changes are coming. One, it's going to change the timeline. The FAFSA is not going to be available till December. Although it's possible that you still have financial aid, namely the CSS profile, due in November. So before the FAFSA becomes available, so pay attention to that. The three that I want to highlight is really on the cons list, and these changes, with all the talk around the country of making college more affordable, these changes are doing the opposite for a lot of families, quite honestly. And the three groups of families that this potentially could affect and in essence raise their EFC: families with multiple kids in college at the same time, right? Parents in divorce separated situations, what we call two-parent households, and then small business owners, right? Those three groups of families are going to be negatively impacted by these FAFSA changes. So if you fall into those categories, stay tuned. We give it a lot of help and a lot of support to those specific groups. But you want to be aware that these changes specifically to those groups are not necessarily going to help you. So be aware of those. All right. So that's kind of the high level financial aid kind of umbrella there. And so now we're going to do a deep dive here with Brian and let him take it away on the admissions front.
Thanks, Matt. So this is just kind of an overview of what we're going to be talking about tonight. Now, as I said, we're only going to scratch the surface of kind of everything that's going on in college admissions. And what I'll also say is, you're going to have the opportunity to learn a lot tonight. And you'll find that as you begin and work through your college search process, there are a lot of people out there that I would consider experts in the college admissions field. And then there are a lot of people that would consider themselves experts in the college admissions field. To me, a great way to kind of find and make sure people are those who have worked on both sides of the aisle, both the college and high school side, but more importantly, those who are always learning. The process is changing rapidly every year. And just like every other industry, COVID obviously flipped it upside down. And we'll talk about that a little bit today. But a lot of what we're going to talk about is kind of what's now happened coming out of COVID, and not necessarily those COVID years as well, too. So a lot of the data that I'll talk about and stuff honestly goes back to about 2020, maybe 2019. The reason being is college admissions data usually only has about a shelf life of 5 years anyway before it kind of becomes null and void. But specifically because of COVID, that has kind of been shortened to like 2 or 3 years. So we're going to talk about some of the changing acceptance rate at some four-year schools, just this new era and new wave of students applying early and earlier, and a lot of that in relation to the new test optional wave that occurs as well too. Kind of the differences that have now occurred because of that test optional in terms of the weight between the qualitative side of the process and then also the quantitative side, particularly those letters of recommendation. One big thing that people may not know that's also occurring is the SAT and PSAT are going digital. Some already have. That also includes the AP exams, essentially the entire College Board product. And then talking a little bit about just where students are going in comparison to kind of where before COVID. So Matt, if you want to hit the next slide. So one of the biggest things that I always like to kind of set the scene for families whenever I talk about college admissions first is how does the process actually work? Because I think there's a lot of misnomers about how students get in or not get in and who reads the files and how the file gets read. And do you actually read my essay? I can say with the utmost confidence, having worked at schools that both had less than 1,000 undergraduate students, and then having worked at schools like BU that had 16,000 undergraduate students, we read every application. And what I mean we is multiple people read every application. So most cases, the first person to read is the territory manager. So as I mentioned in my introduction, when I worked at BU, specifically, I recruited for the states of Texas and Oklahoma. So anytime an application came from that state, I was always the first person to get my eyes on it. It was my opportunity and my job to essentially get to know and become experts of the high schools in that area, learn their curriculums on a deeper level, and then obviously go out and meet the students. And so that was always the first person. There was always then at least one more reader that was looking at that. And in most, if not all cases, there was a third reader. Now, where would there not be a third reader? I always called it like there's the 90 and then 5 and 5 rule. There was the 5% of people that we knew were just slam dunks and we're absolutely going to get in. There was always going to be a second reader on there for auditing and to prove non-bias, but just to make sure. And then there was that 5% that just unfortunately, maybe through some poor counseling or the student just taking a shot in the dark, just weren't going to be the right academic fit. We're still going to be that second reader that would look at it. Now, 90% of that kind of other application pool would get that third reader. And many would go into what's known as committee. And that would be a group of people, whether it be via an online system or in person, literally talking about applicants and making decisions on them as a group and deciding within the parameters that each school has set, is it a good fit? Now, these parameters can vary from year to year. They can change from year to year in terms of the priorities of the institution, and we'll talk about that in a second. So it's important to know that what may be a competitive applicant one year isn't necessarily the case for the next year. These would maybe also then go to a scholarship committee. This was usually a whole new group of people in the office that hadn't previously viewed the applications. For example, in most cases, there was a Texas and Oklahoma student that was up for a scholarship, I wasn't in that room, again, to make sure that there was an unbiased kind of look at it. And then there's obviously those kind of the special interest committee students on specific academic programs like an accelerated medical or accelerated dental, specific engineering programs. Whether the student was a legacy, although we'll talk a little bit about how that is dwindling away a little bit. And then also, obviously, kind of prospective student athletes. There's usually then even another sign-off in nature, whether it be a dean of admission or a director or a VP of enrollment that would kind of make that final decision on the application. Go to the next slide. So what goes into a decision? First off, so much. And so what I'm going to try to dwindle it down and simplify it here, but there are kind of two sides of it. There is the student side, and then what we'll talk about in a second is kind of the institution side. So the student side is the kind of the one that's obvious. It's the one that's frontward facing. It's the one that students think is the reason why they get in or not get in. And in many cases, it's going to have more weight. Now, the top thing, obviously, is always going to be academic rigor compared to the academic offerings, and then how you do by that. So what I mean by that is, what are the classes that you're taking in relation to the classes that were offered to you at your high school, and what are the grades you're getting? And so it's important to kind of understand what I mean by that, and that if you go to a high school that only allows you to say take 3 APs every year, you're not going to be punished for not taking 4 or 5 APs, even if students from other schools can take that. Schools will judge you by the curriculum that was placed in front of you and how much you challenged yourself within that curriculum. Obviously, there's the personal essay, which has been talked about ad nauseum, and we do a lot of work on it, and we'll continue to do a lot of work on it. And then the supplemental essays as well, which become more popular, and we'll continue to talk about that. Schools have now introduced these new essays, not so new for some schools, brand new for others, where they're asking more specific questions related maybe to their mission, to your interest in the institution, or your interest in your academic section, or even something kind of a little out of left field. One of my favorite kind of supplemental essays to bring up is the University of Vermont in past years. Proud of 2 of their most famous alumni. They ask, what would your flavor, what flavor of Ben & Jerry's ice cream would you be and why? And so it gives you an idea of really those supplemental essays can be all over the map. Now, SATs and ACT scores for so long were considered kind of right under grades as far as the most important thing. And in a recent survey in 2018 by the National Association of College Admissions Counselors, they were ranked second when asked college admission reps, what do you consider the most important pieces of the application? They redid that survey in 2021, and they were ranked 5th. So it shows you the difference of the test optional movement and what has caused a real change in kind of the priorities. Do SATs and ACTs still matter? Absolutely. Should you still take them multiple times and prepare? You better believe it. Because if you have strong scores, you want to be able to use them. But know that 4 hours on a Saturday morning doesn't necessarily have the weight that it used to when it comes to the college admissions process. Things like your personal background will obviously play in, and then obviously demonstrated interest. And what this means is, what is your interaction with the school? So have you gone on campus visits? Have you come to the visits when they come and visit your high school? Are you interacting with the college rep? And are you doing interviews? Things like that can make a difference on the student side. In terms of what goes into the decision on the college side, and this is kind of where families and parents and students, will have a tough time when it comes to the admission cycle. One of the things when I'm working with the students in my high school, and it kind of maybe is a little bit of a slap in the face, but one of the things I start with at the beginning of my senior info session, in the first week of their senior year, my first slide says, the college admissions process is unfair. Because at its core, you don't have complete control over it. And that field goal can kind of move and jiggle from year to year. And this is a big way of how that works. So looking at the college side, what is their overall admission strategy? What kind of deadlines do they offer? Do they offer that early decision package that is binding, meaning, yeah, it's easier to get in, but there's also that binding element? Are they only a school that offers ED and regular decision, or do they also offer early action? And how do those priorities weigh in? What are some academic trends that are happening at the school? You know, if they've just built a brand new nursing building and they have a new nursing program, they're going to be looking to fill that building pretty quickly. So it might be a little easier to get into nursing in year 1 or 2 than it is in year 5 or 6. What is the financial priorities and stability of the school? Now, this is one that has become really important, and not just for small schools, for really schools all across the country. And even if they're not at risk of closure, well, sadly, we have seen some schools close in the past few years, particularly since COVID, we have seen a lot of families not understand solely kind of what is the financial stability of the school. And I say right off the top, you should absolutely be asking this question when visiting colleges. You know, how does your financial outlook look? What is it been? Have you been able to put money back into the school, or are they kind of working year to year? Matt kind of touched on it a little bit, and we'll continue to touch on it, but what is the merit and financial aid strategy of the school? You know, have they given out, are they only giving out a certain amount of money? Are they a need blind school? Are they a school that does not give academic scholarships? How does that weigh into your decision? And then this is where it can become kind of really unfair. What are some of the population priorities? You know, have they over enrolled in one population in a previous year and need to make sure to kind of scale back on that in the next year? So it really comes down to the year that you're applying. I was working with schools, and the conversation I had a school that I worked with a few years ago that was very honest with me and said, Brian, if you're a male, it's going to be harder to get in this year. We over-enrolled males last year. We want to balance between our genders on campus, and we have to make sure that we do that. So it's just going to be a little bit harder for a male to get in than a female this year. There's nothing against those male applicants. They know that they had to make tough decisions, and it just really comes down to the year you were born meant it was a little more unfair for a male to get in than for a female. And then I always bring this up, kind of athletic recruitment strategies and roster spots. Just because you could be the best player doesn't always mean the best fit. You could be throwing 90 miles an hour with a slider that goes 12-6. But if they have 4 guys that they recruited to do the same thing the year before, it doesn't really matter. They're not going to recruit you because they may not need you on your roster. And so these are type of things that you don't necessarily have control of that can still play into your admissions decision. Next slide. So as we're looking at kind of global admissions trends and what is kind of happening, one of the things that I hinted at is legacy preferences are absolutely decreasing at this point. So for those who don't know what legacy is, it means that you have a relative, whether it be a parent or a sibling or a grandparent, or maybe even a more of a distance relative like a cousin or aunt and uncle that has attended that school before. And so schools, obviously, they like to have that legacy family, and they'll take that into consideration. But what has come out of this kind of recent history, and what will continue to come out, particularly as more and more of the Supreme Court cases surrounding college admissions become finalized, is schools are leaning away from legacy in the way that they used to, and that it doesn't necessarily have the favoritism that it would have given you in the college admissions process prior. The Varsity Blues scandal obviously caused a lot of schools to take a closer look at this to see, are we treating our non-legacy applicants fairly, comparable to our legacy applicants? What is our line in terms of kind of admissibility when it comes to our legacy applicants? And certain schools have come out publicly and said, you know, including Cornell and Amherst and many larger state schools, and saying, we're dialing back to the sense that we may not even consider legacy at all. And so where many times it was really smart college admissions practice to say, oh, well, your dad went to University of Virginia, we should have you apply there too. That's not necessarily not the case anymore, but it isn't necessarily the layup that I think families might think it is. One of the biggest things that's happening in college admissions, as it is in any industry right now, is the infusion of AI and ChatGPT in particular. Schools have already come out and said, do not use it. They have programs set in place, they have ideas set in place that can combat that when it comes to writing your college essay or working on your application. One of the biggest things that I tell my students is, yes, you could go on to ChatGPT right now and say, write me a college essay about overcoming adversity. What AI can't do is show empathy, growth, and introspection. And like I did, many of these people reading your applications have read thousands and thousands and thousands of applications. And that means they've read even more essays when you consider some applications have multiple essays. They've gotten very good at sniffing out when that person they're reading isn't necessarily the writer. Now, many times in the past, maybe it was a parent or just someone who maybe put a little too much influence on that essay, but they're starting to notice this too. So just something to keep in mind. Now, that being said, what AI has done is it's caused a kind of big conversation to arise in college admissions lately of what is the value of the college essay. Now, by no means am I saying in 12 weeks, schools are going to come out and say, don't worry, we're not doing college essays this year. I don't see it going anywhere. What schools are doing, though, is thinking, are there other ways that students can identify or present themselves in that personal way? So some schools, only a small amount right now, but some schools are offering, hey, instead of an essay, if you would like to do a 90-second to 2-minute video introduction, we'll allow you to do that instead. I haven't seen any schools that are requiring that outside of obviously specialty situations like a fine arts program, but know that that is a trend that is starting to leak into college admissions. Application volumes just continue to go through the roof, and this is really due to test optional. So what happened within the test optional, and I'll touch on this kind of throughout, but just to kind of quickly give you the overview. When COVID hit in March of 2020, obviously all of the testing centers around the country for both the SAT and the ACT were forced to close. At that point, and really even still with SAT going digital, you still have to take it in the classroom. So there was no medium for students to be able to take the test at home. Knowing this, schools were forced to go test optional, knowing the majority, if not all of their applicants, were not going to be able to take standardized tests. And so what that caused schools to do is to kind of reevaluate how they looked at applicants, reevaluated what they prioritized most, and sought to look and see if, well, can we still enroll the same type of competitive academic class that we were when we were using test scores. And a lot of those schools, including all 8 Ivy League institutions, as well as close to 90% of the US News and World Top 50, realized that they could. And so many of those have continued to be test optional. Now, I did these slides just a few days ago. So in a future slide, you're going to see the number 1,700 plus schools have committed to test optional. Since I did that original slide, maybe this time last week, 200 more schools have signed on to say they're test optional. So now that number is 1,900 plus schools are test optional. And then there are close to 100 schools which are test blind at this point, which means that they don't require test scores at all. And actually you can't submit them even if you had a perfect score. Some great examples of that are WPI, a great engineering school here in Massachusetts, and then the entirety of the University of California state system. So UCLA, UCal Berkeley, UC Davis, CSU Fullerton, all of these top tier universities, you do not have your test scores as part of your admission. But you're seeing some of the top schools around the area and just really the vast growth of applications they've had. But then the Common Application also came out, and from 2020 to 2023, they have seen a 30% increase overall on the amount of applications being submitted, which is just a drastic rise comparable to what you used to see in that 3 to 4 year gap.
Awesome. Yeah, great info. Brian, why don't you take a blow? I'll pull up the MyCat. I know there's a few questions on here. There's a few
I can answer some of these questions too.
All right. So this actually works out. We'll give Brian a rest here. Some tremendous insights, some tremendous information. So going back to, how do you figure out, where you fall from a college perspective, right? Bennett, all right. Delayed a little bit, so maybe we'll run a little over. All right, so what does this do, right? So firstly, all you guys should set up your MyCat account completely free. You can choose up to 3 schools. And what this helps you do right now tonight, right? You can start to understand what is your EFC, right? What is your EFC, and then what that means at different schools. For the majority of families, right, the sticker price of the school really doesn't matter, or is the third most important factor, right? What's more important is what is your EFC, right? And then the schools you're looking at or are going to apply to, how do those schools do business, right? How do they do business? Now, couple points I want to highlight here. As you can see, there's a couple different EFCs. So we're going to focus on the federal EFC, the institutional EFC, right? So there's actually two different types of EFCs. And again, it's going to be the SAI, but for the most part, distinction without a difference, right? So the federal EFC, I like to use little mnemonic device, FAFSA federal. So most public schools are going to use this federal methodology to calculate the EFC, right? You see it's $14,000 here. Most of the name brand private schools, in addition to the FAFSA, they're going to require an additional financial aid form called the CSS profile. That CSS profile uses a different formula to calculate your family's EFC. Now, one of the two major reasons why the federal EFC will not be necessarily aligned with the institutional EFC, the first in this scenario, in this hypothetical, this is the case, is in a divorce separated situation, right? In a divorce separated situation, the FAFSA only requires the custodial parent, or now the parent who provides the most financial support, whereas the institutional EFC, schools like Amherst and Columbia and University of Miami, they're going to look at both parents' finances, right? Even in a two-household situation. The other thing that the schools that utilize the institutional EFC as compared to the federal EFC does not ask about your house, right? Your primary residence is irrelevant on the FAFSA, right? However, for the institutional EFC, and again, it's mostly the name brand private schools that use this, your primary residence, your house, that's fair game, right? And they're going to factor in the equity in your home when they calculate your EFC at those schools, right? So, understand there's a couple different EFCs, and really the point we want to drive home here tonight, from a financial angle, is start to understand what your specific EFC is, right? And then what that means at the different schools that you're interested in, right? You want to go into this process with an understanding of, what the schools you're going to apply to, how much are they going to cost, right? Now, there's going to be some families out there that regardless of they fill out the financial aid applications and their EFC is 90,000, 100,000, right? Meaning their EFC exceeds the cost of attendance. What that means then is they are not going to get any need-based financial aid, right? Important. Even if you're going to have a high EFC, you want to know that, you want to understand that, because then some schools like Amherst, like Columbia, they only give need-based financial aid. So those schools are going to cost you full sticker price, right? If you have a $100,000 EFC at Columbia, you're paying $86,000, right? You want to know that going in. You may determine that that's worth the investment in Columbia, and Brian certainly would never tell you it's not. But again, you want to know that going in. And part of this process, what we urge every family to do is really build a smart school list, right? And a smart school list, both from an admissions perspective, right? Reach target safety, but also a financial perspective, right? You do not want every school your son, daughter, child's admitted to cost you $80,000, $85,000, $90,000 a year. Give yourself options, right? So if you're not going to get any need-based financial aid, well, then you're in that other bucket of money, right? Merit scholarships. And here's where this software is super helpful as well, right? You look at a school like a University of Miami, they do give merit money, right? So you could see, so again, hypothetically, you wouldn't get any need-based aid. This family would still receive a $22,000 merit scholarship at the University of Miami, right? So significant discount off the sticker price, even if you're not getting need-based aid, right? So the great thing about the software, if you scroll down, you can see, okay, where does your kid fall? And, what potentially merit award, will they be eligible for, right? So one, does the University of Miami give merit? Yes. And then two, what are the kind of general qualifications that they're looking for to award that money, right? And then it also helps for everything Brian talking about from an admissions perspective, right? You can kind of get a sense of, where your son or daughter falls, in the admissions criteria here, right? Kind of the average GPA, the SAT, ACT range, right? And really start to get a good handle and start to build a smart school list. And then the last thing I want to highlight here from a financial aid perspective, this slide here tells you how the school does business. What is their business model, right? So the University of Miami uses the institutional methodology, which means they require the CSS profile. And again, 2 household families, that's significant. If you have home equity, that's significant. They meet 100% of need-based financial aid, but they also give merit scholarships to 53% of their admitted students, right? So they're a rare school that does, strong with need, but also very strong with merit, right? And just to put a point on that, let me show you Columbia real quick. You're going to see, yes, they meet 100% of need-based financial aid, right? But if you have $100,000 EFC, there are no merit opportunities there, right? So you want to go into that knowing that you are going to pay, the sticker price there, right? When you scroll down to the financial aid, yes, they meet 100% of need-based financial aid. So for this family, home run, right? They're getting $58,000 in grant money, need-based financial aid. Unbelievable. It's going to cost them $30,000, basically the price for in-state school for this family, right? But if your EFC is significant, 100,000, there are no merit opportunities at a school like Columbia, right? So again, I can't stress enough, this is a very family-specific process, right? What's your kid's academic standing and what's your EFC? And that's a very college-specific process, right? Every college is their own business. They all do business differently. They all award money differently, right? It's a very difficult kind of process to sort through. And again, that's kind of the foundation of kind of the app. The last thing I'll show you on here before I throw it back to Brian, you can do a search, right? We say, Johns Hopkins. Sometimes I ask for schools from the audience. So you want to throw one out, I can circle back to it. But you can see Johns Hopkins, okay, for this family, 21,000. I like to use, you could big public school in the South, Clemson. All right, significant, pretty decent discount, merit money there, so you can get a handle on what any of these schools are going to cost you, right? So again, encourage all of you to set up an account there and utilize the software. So hopefully Brian took a blow, got some of the questions, got some water, ready to go back at it. All right, we're on next one, right?
Yep. Yeah, next slide. So obviously it's important to kind of know just what's happening at the top in terms of some of the schools. One of the things to kind of keep in mind is with the Infuse It test optional, a lot of people think, well, the competitive schools got easier to get into. What it essentially says is it's easier to apply to them. Now, there are students that get into schools, including the Ivies, within test optional. But know that that doesn't mean it's necessarily a guarantee. Ivy League admission rates have actually dropped 1.5% since 2019. And the top 30 schools in the country are seeing a drop of over 3% since 2019. Many of this is because as they get more applications, sadly, they have the opportunity to deny more kids. And so that admission rate is naturally going to drop. They're going to continue to admit the same number of kids, but just simple math, with more applications, more kids are going to get denied too. I spoke earlier a lot about test optional, and as I said, that number has continued to rise. There are some notable schools that are switching back to requiring scores: MIT, Purdue, Georgetown, and then the entire Florida state school system is kind of gone opposite of the California state school system. They're requiring test scores. What we are seeing, and what I've seen both individually with my students, but what I'm seeing nationwide when I talk to other counselors, is if you're going to go test optional, our advice for most schools, particularly those competitive schools, is going to be to apply early. You're going to find that students are having much higher admission rates through test optional policies, through early decision and early action, than they are through regular decision. Simply put, a school is a little more open in their ability to accept students who maybe are test optional and maybe don't fall in necessarily that top tier of grades earlier in that process, when those numbers aren't dwindling down in terms of the amount of kids that they can admit. Beyond that, you're obviously showing a true interest in the school, particularly if you're applying early decision. So definitely to keep that in mind. Schools have also taken much bigger advantage of wait lists and deferral lists. Deferral, for those who don't know, is when, say, you apply early decision or early action, the school doesn't outright deny you. They will defer you to regular decision and encourage you to send more grades, send more activities, anything you've done, basically to say, we want to see a little bit more before we make a final decision. Schools will also waitlist a number of students, what I think can be sometimes the most cruel piece of the college admissions process, because essentially you're kind of being hung on a thread for a call that could come right on May 2nd or could have never come at all. schools use these wait lists, particularly the more competitive schools, to ensure that they don't over-enroll multiple years. If you over-enroll, you run out of beds to put the kids, and we don't want kids sleeping on the street. And so they have to make sure they hit that number. And many of these top schools did over-enroll coming out of COVID, particularly because of the test optional policy. So this year we saw an influx of students go on the wait list in the sense of they got to wait for the kind of May 1st deadline to come in, see where that number fell, and then use that wait list to slowly pluck a few applicants off to kind of fill in the back end of their class. Now, what has happened because of this is there will be kind of a waterfall effect from the top tiered acceptance universities. So schools like the Ivy Leagues, like the top 30, are getting over-enrolled over and over and over again. And so what's going to happen now is you may see that next level of school, still great schools in that maybe top 30 to top 75, they're going to start to maybe have over-enrollment because students aren't going to be able to know, okay, well, I can't get into a BC, so I'm going to apply now to a Holy Cross or to a University of Maryland College Park or to University of Indiana, schools that by no means you should sneeze at, but just aren't necessarily as competitive as Boston College, but are a lot of those other three schools are schools that kids would apply to if they're also applying to BC. So you might see more top tier school kids go to those schools over the next couple of years, thinking, well, maybe I can't get into what the level of competitiveness of BC has become. You want to go to the next slide as well too. So within that, early decision and early action trends have grown. More students are using them more and more as a way to show their interest. We've seen close to a 10% increase for most of the top schools around the country in early decision. Brown in particular got a 10% increase in just this year, not over the 4-year period. Dartmouth a 14% increase, and then Yale saw a 35% increase in their last 3 years when it came to top tier school students applying early decision. We've seen large swings in acceptance rates, as I've talked about, and using my former employee BU as an example, 55% of BU's first year class this year was admitted through early decision. That in years past number would have been somewhere in the mid 30s. Of that cohort, and this kind of explains the difference in the test optional exceptions, 31% of these students submitted standardized test scores. Now, only 54% of the students who enrolled overall, or admitted overall, submitted test scores. So close to 60% of that population is coming out of early decision, which is a much smaller applicant pool than regular decision. And so you can see the vast difference in how test optional can be viewed in terms of when students are applying. University of Virginia, you see 42% of students opted not to submit test scores, but only 26% of those students who were admitted overall were test optional. Many of those earlier on in the process. So while it's not a golden rule, if you're applying to one of these top tier schools and are considering test optional, don't be surprised if you're working with us or you're working with a really informed counselor that they're going to encourage you to maybe apply earlier rather than later to that school. And this is just kind of an overall chart. This is something that I think will be great for you all to dive deeper in when it comes to kind of looking at our recording, but it gives you an idea of what is the difference in kind of admit rates from no test from one year to another. And what you're seeing is, as we've kind of come more and more out of the COVID and the pandemic era, what we're seeing is while kids from test optional are still getting in, there is kind of this misnomer that it's still 2020. And if you're test optional, you're going to get into all the top schools in the world. You still need to consider taking test scores and know that that can't be just the only reason that you decide to apply to a school. And then the next slide just shows some great admission rates from some of the different schools around the country. You can see the early round acceptances and how they're different. The numbers next to their school are their average overall acceptance rate every year. And so what you're seeing is a vast difference from these schools and your ability to get in through an early round acceptance program comparable to that of regular decision. Even situations like BC up at their top, it's a close to a 30% difference in some regions. Williams College, close to a 30% jump. But even schools like Vanderbilt, Notre Dame, Johns Hopkins, you're still seeing kind of a rise. Well, it's not as vast of a jump, definitely still have a rise in chance of being able to get in. And then, as I talked about earlier, and I'm trying to make sure we leave time for questions, one of the biggest changes in college admissions right now is the digital SAT and it kind of making waves. Many of your students may have been part of a test program this spring for the APs classes where you took digital APs, meaning they were done on a personal laptop or iPad or something like that. The days of pencil and paper and Scantrons are almost over. So this year's seniors will have the opportunity to do a fall paper SAT if their school is hosting a school day SAT. But the PSAT moving forward is completely digital. And starting next spring, so spring 2024, the SAT will be digital. The test becomes a little shorter in nature. It becomes around 2 hours of testing rather than 3 hours. There are shorter reading passages. And now, where in the past there was 2 sections of math that you couldn't use a calculator and 2 that you could, there's now a built-in calculator that you can use with every section. Students who receive accommodations through the College Board, you can still get those. But obviously, this brings up a lot of logistical problems. I joke with Matt, with Matt Carpenter and a lot of the people at College A Pro. Every year I lose more and more hair because of the students that I'm working with. I think this year it's going to be the College Board. Because as a test coordinator for my high school, trying to just figure out, how is the Wi-Fi going to hold up? How am I going to troubleshoot? Things like that. I've gotten into a good system of know exactly how the College Board works, and they've kind of switched it on their heads. I made another joke. There's obviously a lot of drama in pro golf going on right now. The same can be said for counselors versus the College Board at the moment in terms of kind of the changes being made. And so this ultimately could be a really good thing. It means you get your scores earlier. It means it's more accessible for students overall. But know that there are going to be some bumps in the road. So let me just say, whoever your test coordinator is, be patient with them in these first 2 years as they learn how to navigate this new landscape. And then last, I always just kind of round it out. Know that the qualitative portion of the student is still going to play a huge role. We've talked a lot about test scores and how they're going to play a role with top tier schools. But ultimately, the goal of a college counselor and the goal of a student when working on your application should be making sure your 4 years represent you and not 4 hours. Academic rigor and the work you do in the classroom is always going to be king, regardless of what those test scores look. They still matter at top schools, but they're not necessarily going to have the weight that they used to have. Doing well in high level courses is what's going to make you the strongest applicant, and especially in those AP or IB or whatever those higher level courses that are offered at your school are. And then I always encourage students that they need to get outside of their comfort zone when thinking about activities. There's a difference between being involved, which means, just signing up for a bunch of clubs, to being invested, which means, okay, maybe I'm going to 2-3 meetings a week, to then being what schools are looking for. And that's impactful. And I always use the example of, okay, a lot of kids come up and say, oh, well, I was a high school captain, so that's going to look great on an application. There are 4.5 million high school captains in the United States this year. It's not a differentiator. It's what you do when you get that title that makes a difference. That's the difference we're looking for. And that's the difference schools are going to be looking for as you're thinking about activities. And then as far as letter of recommendations, as we talk about, one, you should always be looking for 2 teacher letters of recommendation and 1 counselor letter. This is a piece of the application that is inflated in importance as test scores have kind of dropped down in rate. And then that survey that I spoke about, letters of recommendation was always around 6 or 7. It's jumped up to number 3 after kind of academic rigor and then the essay in terms of what colleges view as the most important piece. The outside voice has just never been more important. So you should really be thinking about who is going to be representing you in this process. And also know that you can include additional letters of recommendation, whether that be coaches, bosses, asking additional teachers, or even community members. Mom and dad, I hate to say, unfortunately, you can't write letters. You think it's a joke, but I definitely got them. But know that you can get creative with who can write your letter. Maybe there's a neighbor that your student has babysat for a while or done activities. Things like that can definitely make a difference.
Brian, real quick, just because we received a ton of questions about EDEA, I'll really quickly, and again, take a blow there, unbelievable. But I'll give you kind of, so for early decision, from my perspective, and I'll toss over Brian to obviously get his insights. For early decision, right? Basically when you're going into an early decision situation, you want to make sure that you check 2 boxes, right? The first one being that that's the kid's school. He's 100% all in on that school. And if he gets in, that's where he's going. The other component of it, and again, I tell you guys, I come from the financial aid perspective, right? The other component that you have to, well, you don't have to, but you absolutely should, right, take into consideration is what is your estimated cost at that school, right? I am strongly against going into early decision blind financially, right? You want to have an idea of how on the front end, how much is that school going to cost you? So if you can check the two boxes, one, this is absolutely my kid's top choice. And then two, right, which a lot of times we only do one, but two, you absolutely should say, okay, how much is this school actually going to cost me? How much can I expect to receive from this school? If I can check both of those boxes, early decision, right? If I'm comfortable with the number that I'm looking at as far as cost, then go early decision, right? If not, I would put, pump the brakes on, committing to a school without understanding and being aware of and being comfortable with, right, the financial ramifications of that. But, if you want to, elaborate on that and, give your insight, kind of the
Yeah, I would just second in that you need to make sure that you are completely comfortable with what that school is and the commitment that you're making. I always say it from the standpoint of students have to sign an early decision agreement, which not only a student has to sign and a parent has to sign, but also the counselor has to sign. So what I tell my kids is, I've developed relationships with these schools. They're honest and good working relationships. Don't make me look like a fool in this process. And I think students kind of get and understand the importance of the leap they're taking within early decision.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, awesome. Yeah. So now what, right? I understood, we threw, a ton of information at you guys. Hopefully you have a really good understanding, at least, if this is your first time with us, a high level of financial aid situation, how that works. And then Brian gave you some unbelievable insights and details about kind of the current emissions trends, et cetera, right? So now what, right? So let's keep the ball rolling. What do you want to do now, right? So, and let's see if I could actually get this to work. Okay, so now what? Firstly, the first thing that everyone should do and wants to do, set up a free MyCap account, right? It's completely free. You want to start to get an idea, get a handle of what your EFC is going to be. You could do that tonight. You could choose up to 3 schools completely free. And start to get an understanding of what those schools are going to cost you, right? And then interfacing, working with College Aid Pro, myself specifically, Brian specifically, or one of our other pros. You have a couple different options there, right? So the first one, what we call kind of for the DIYers, where you say, okay, I'm here for the information. I got a good handle on the admissions end. I have a really good handle on the financial aid end. I understand how colleges do business, what I could potentially expect. I just need a little bit more assistance, right? What we strongly recommend in that situation, you're a DIYer, go to the MyCap account, you go up to the upgrade button or talk to an expert, right? You can upgrade the software. You get all the bells and whistles. You can do an advanced search, put as many schools as you want, filter schools, search for merit, search for which schools will give you the most money, really, really powerful search tool. With that comes with an hour Zoom meeting with an expert, myself, Brian, one of our other pros. Right now, and I'll explain to you why we're doing this in a second, but you have the opportunity to use this discount code, admissions24. You get a 20% discount, right? So again, the DIYer, you can upgrade your software. It's good for a year, and then you can book a 1-hour meeting with one of our experts. FYI on that, you do not have to book the meeting, tomorrow or anytime. You can save that meeting for 6 months. So if you want to take advantage of the coupon, upgrade the software, and then save your meeting for down the road, you're welcome to do that, right? So this is what we say is kind of for the DIY. You have a good handle on things. You just have a kind of few specific questions. You just need a little bit more additional help, right? Then we have kind of what we call the comprehensive one-on-one programs that we offer here with College Aid Pro. And, who are these for? It's for the families that, are looking at the process. You feel completely overwhelmed. You don't have the time. You don't know where to start. You're not familiar. You're in one of the groups, right? Multiple kids in college, divorce, separated situations, small business owners that the FAFSA changes are significantly going to affect you. I would strongly consider working together in a one-on-one capacity with us, right? So let me walk you through there. So the first one that we have is what we call a Wake Me When It's Over financial aid package, right? And so this is kind of what I specialize in, what I've been doing for a decade. You know, I'll get to zoom down at some point in my life. And so, what we do here with the Wake Me When It's Over financial aid, right? There's basically four components of the financial aid process that we're intimately involved with. So firstly, you have complete access to myself or another pro until your son or daughter, your child moves into their dorm room, right? So that's the length of the relationship. From a high level perspective, there's four parts of the financial aid process that we're kind of intimately involved in. The first is the strategy, right? What schools are we going to apply to? Hopefully after this webinar tonight, you get a really good understanding. What schools you apply to is going to be a major factor in how much you actually end up paying, right? So let us help you build a balanced list, both from a financial perspective and a admissions perspective. Make sure you have options. Let me help you understand, what schools you should be looking at, give you some recommendations, additional schools to consider. So we kind of help you strategize with the school list. The second component, we actually do the financial aid applications for you, the FAFSA, the CSS profile. If you're divorced, the non-custodial parent application. A lot of the private schools, UPenn, USC, Georgetown, they have a third institutional financial aid application that needs to be completed. We handle that. We take care of that. And really the big value there is, let's get your EFC as low as humanly possible, right? Let's put you in position to get as much money as possible. The third one, once your son, daughter, child gets admitted to a college, we help you go back and appeal or negotiate. Every family can and should appeal their award. Every family is going to have a different best strategy. We basically coach you up on how to go get more on the back end, right? So the first three parts of the process, we want to shrink your costs. We're going to make sure you're paying as little as possible at every school. And then the fourth component is, okay, you pick a school, super excited, you get a great award. How do you pay for it, right? How do you actually pay for college? We help you put a customized plan in place, to pay for college in the smartest, most economical way. So that's the first, kind of level that we offer. Then Brian has the admissions package as well.
Yeah, and so I'll just kind of quickly go over, what we do is we really do all the nuts and bolts of the application. So not only could you book me for an hour if you wanted, and it can really help you through any piece of the process, but those families that feel like, we just want the entire process catered to, we do everything from build a complete college list through a real kind of auditing process, have the students fill out an extensive survey that allows a list, and then we really kind of do the accordion effect of making the list bigger and smaller. I make an entire essay strategy for you in terms of breaking down not only a personal essay, but any supplemental essays you need to do. If there's need for an interview, if you're interviewing at schools, I assist with that. And then really setting internal deadlines with each individual students, catering to their schedule, whether that be sports and activities, vacations, things like that. And then you have direct access to me through email. In most cases, I can kind of give responses within 48 hours to any questions that you have. We'll say, and it will sound a little bit salesy, but it's true, is these groups are filling up quickly. And so now is the time to strike, because as it gets closer, not only to the middle of the summer, these groups will continue to fill, but also those deadlines will creep closer and closer. And the ability to help you in a way that is, I never say stress-free, because it's just impossible to say the college admissions process is going to be stress-free, but to take a lot of the stress away and really to empower the student in the process. Getting started in the summer is crucial. And so that's what I would do with your student.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the third option is basically cover all your bases, right? You get the best of both worlds. You get Brian on the admissions end, you get myself or another pro on the financial aid end. And like we say, two birds, one stone, what we consider an unbelievable value. Myself on the financial ed, primarily dealing with parents and making sure you're strategizing and making sure your EFC is as low as possible. And then Brian working with the student on the admissions end. If you're interested in any of these, you can scroll down right to the bottom. Make sure you use your admissions 20 code, right? And you can sign up here. That being said, we understand you met us an hour ago, potentially, right? If you want to know more, right, or you have some questions about any specific packages or trouble figuring out which one's right for you, we offer, and I'll offer, you can book a 20-minute consult with myself, and I'll drop this in the chat right now. Feel free to take me up. I'm happy to talk you through, what package might be right for you, what needs you have, and make sure, we get you lined up and squared away with the exact right package for you. As you can see, we're offering a significant discount, right? Couple reasons for that. Firstly, we appreciate you coming out tonight, right? We do appreciate you coming out. The second part, the more time, and Brian touched on this, the more time that we have to work together, the more help we can give you, right? And the better you're going to be. Like anything else in life, the more time that you plan and prepare, the better the results are going to be, right? So listen, we'll welcome you with open arms in October, November, but here's what I'll tell you, it absolutely will cost you more, right? So you can see our discount, our regular rate is $3,000 here. You get a discount for $2,500. That's going up to $3,250 July 1st, right? Why? It's simple supply and demand. As we get closer to game time, the price is going to rise, right? Also, as Brian mentioned, our roster starts to fill up, right? So we don't have the capacity to take on as many folks. So recommend you guys act on this. You will not see a better price than you're being offered right now. And here's what I'll tell you, in doing this for a decade, many, if not most, if not close to all families that work with us on a one-on-one capacity, at the end of the day, they leave with the idea that this was the best investment I made throughout the college process, right? So we're here and available with that one-on-one help if it makes sense for you and your family. And like I said, you can use the link which I dropped in the chat. Happy to talk more specifically about it. So we will stay on here. Brian, I don't know if you have any questions that you want to hit on, or
no, just kind of been going through the questions quickly. Just about the admissions package. You would either specifically do it by myself or Dan Bissick, who is another excellent individual counselor on the admissions side, who has over 20 years experience working with families. A lot of people have asked what are the different essays that I've read? Everything from, personal essays to supplemental essays. I've specifically worked for, a small liberal arts school in Boston. I worked for Bryant University in Rhode Island, where I did my undergrad. And then also Boston University, as I said. I also have assisted in kind of the essay development for the University of Vermont, where I served on their advisory council, and currently serve on the advisory council for Western New England University. We're kind of helping them kind of revision their process as well too. So I've seen any and all essays as we've kind of gone through it. And I like to joke, I've read a lot of really good essays and some not so great essays. So I like to be able to help students through that process.
Awesome. Yeah, so guys, listen, hopefully you guys all learned a lot. Again, set up your accounts. We'll send this link out tomorrow along with the recording and the slides. Again, I'll drop it in the chat one more time. And, feel free to take us up on this offer. Once again, it's going to expire June 18th. So act now. And if you do have any questions, so the 20-minute chat, if you do have any questions about any specific packages, I will drop this link. Someone asked for it in the chat right now. So feel free to schedule that, and we'll get you squared away with whatever package, fits you best. But all right at an hour, almost. And with my Zoom expertise on display, we still got it right at an hour there. So Brian, great job as always. Thank you everyone for coming out tonight. And we'll talk to all of you in the future. Take care.
Awesome. Have a great night, everyone.